Hello and welcome to the first episode of this design series where we'll be building hero sections from design concept in Figma to live builds using Elementor page builder. For our first project, we'll be working on a clean conversion focused layout that is ideal for websites within the cosmetic clinic industry. Before jumping into Elementor, here's a quick breakdown of our Figma design file. The layout starts with a 14 by 40 pixel wide desktop frame set on a white background for a clean, minimal look. At the very top of our design, the header sits on a soft gray background, adding just enough contrast to separate it from the rest of the page. The hero section itself features a bold headline delivering the value proposition, a short supporting description to follow, and a call or two call to action button in this case. Now, anchoring the design at the bottom is a 3-column section with images and social proof that ties the entire hero section together both visually and strategically. Now, if you'd rather skip building this and just grab the finished template, this hero section is currently available as a ready-to-use template on Gumroad. Links in the description. Alright, moving over to WordPress, I've gone ahead to install the theme Hello Elementor. Now, we'll be building all of this using the free version of Elementor, which means we'll be working on Elementor's canvas layout. Speaking of which, I won't be building headers for most of these hero sections, mainly because header design tends to be very subjective and varies from project to project. Instead, I would include a free header template in each video you can easily import and customize to your own. Notwithstanding, here is a quick outline of what this header entails. It starts with a 14 by 40 pixel wide container arranged in a horizontal row. Under items, justify content is set to space between so the logo, menu, and buttons are spread evenly across the container. Lastly, all items are aligned to the center. Switching to the style tab, the background is set to soft gray for contrast, and within the advanced tab there is a 1.5 m padding to the top and bottom for vertical spacing. Within this container, you can find the site logo on the left, a navigation menu at the center, and a call to action button on the right. Each set to a custom width of 15, 70, and 75% respectively. The spacing and padding are already in place for proper alignment, so you can swipe the logo, adjust the menu, or restyle the button however you like. Now with that aside, let's move on to adding our parent container. So I'm just going to click on this, select Flexbox, and for its direction, make sure this is set to column. Moving over to the content width, let's make this 1440 pixels, which is the same as that of our header. So I'm just going to select this, and for its main height, let's make this 90 viewport height. Now it's important to note that I've gotten rid of the column and row gaps by setting this to 0 pixels, all of which can be done within the site settings, then layout, as you can see right here. I've also gone ahead to set the default container paddings to 0 pixels. This essentially means we'd want every spacing between each element or container to be divisible by 4 or 8. Moving back to Elementor's editor, let's select our parent Flexbox container. I'd want to switch over to advanced. Now in here, we'd want to make sure to add 5 m padding to the top. To do this, let's unlink all values, make this m, and I'd want to add in 5 m padding to the top. Now 5 m converts to 80 pixels, which is divisible by 8. Moving back to our design canvas, I'll go ahead to title our parent container Novera Hero section. And with this, I can move on to adding our secondary container into the parent container. So let's click on this, and I will just drag this into the parent container. Now for this container, its direction has to be column vertical. And for the space between, let's make this 24. 24 pixels is also divisible by 8. Switching to our Figma design file, the first element we'll have here will be our heading. So I'm just going to copy this and switch back to Elementor. And in here, I'm just going to add in a heading directly into our secondary container. I will just paste the text directly in here. So let's make this gracefully redefining beauty. Now, taking a look at our design, we can see we have a line break here. So just gracefully is at the top and redefining beauty is directly below. In order to achieve this, let's add in angle brackets, and within the angle bracket, let's add in BR. So with that, we have a line break in between gracefully and redefining beauty. Heading back to our Figma design, we can see we have two colors for our heading. The first would be blue and the second would be black. Now just pay attention to the color right here. So when I highlight this, we can see we have a color hex code of 598FCD. Now in order to achieve this, I will just copy this color hex code, head back to Elementor, come over to style, and for its text color, let's add that in there. Now, in order to make beauty, as we have in our Figma file, we can see we have this color code set to #3334. I'm just going to copy this, head back to Elementor, come over to content, and in here, I would want to add in another HTML code snippet, and it goes like this. I'll be leaving this linked in the description so you can just copy and paste. Let's move on to change our HTML tag to H1. For its alignment, let's make sure to change this to center. For its typography, select this pencil icon. I'm going to make this archival. So select that. And for its size, we would want to make this 112, which aligns with what we have here. Now what this equals to would be 7 rem. 112 pixels equals 7 rem. Heading back to Elementor, I can make the height, I can either leave it at 600, which is semi-bold, or I could make this bold. For its line height, we'll be using a unitless line height of 1.2, which simply tells Elementor that we would like the line height to be 120% of our heading's font size. Moving over to our text color, we already set this to be #598FCD. Okay, with that in place, let's move on to advance, and I would want to reduce the custom weight of this heading to 80%. To do this, let's change this from default to custom, and in here, I'm just going to put in 80%. Lastly, make sure to align this to the center. So essentially, we're telling this to align itself to the center. And that's that for our heading. Now let's move on to the next element, which would be our text description. So I'm just going to copy this, head back to Elementor, and head over to adding a new element, and I'm just going to select this. Either you select this or you can drag. So I'm just going to select that and then paste in our text, which we just copied from Figma. Okay, so with that set, I would just move over to style this. I mean, everything is in place here. So I'm just going to come over to style. For its alignment, make sure this is aligned to the center, and its typography, let's open this up. Now for its font family, I would leave this set to Roboto. Its font size, however, would change this to 1 rem, which is essentially 16 pixels. Now moving down to its weight, we would leave this as well to normal. And its line height, let's make this 1.8. So that will be a line height of 180% of our font size. Now let's move on to change our text color. So let's make this #444B. Now I can actually choose to create our global colors with this. So let's head back, come over to style, and I can just add this in as our primary color. So let's make this, come down here, make this #444B. So let's add that in. Text description. Moving on, I would want to add in a little bit of spacing between our heading and its description. To do this, I can come over to advanced. On link all values here, let's make this 1M to the top. So 16 plus 24 equals 40. So 40 is also divisible by 8. Moving on, let's select our text description. And just as we have in here, you can see this actually breaks from tempo and dictum. So in order to achieve this, we also have to come to it, change this from default to custom. And in here, I would want to make this 55%. And just as we did for our heading, let's make sure to align this to the center. So that's that for our heading and description. Moving on, we have two call to action button right here. And in order to achieve this, we would have to add in another container into our secondary container. So let's head back to adding a new element, and I'm just going to drag this directly below our text description. For its direction, let's make sure this is set to horizontal. Justify content, let's make this center and align all items to the center as well. It's important we also add in spacing between our text description and the buttons, which would go in here. So let's head over to advanced. For its margin, I'm just going to change this to M, unlink all values and make this 1M. So that will be 16 plus 24, which gives us 40. 40 is divisible by 4 and 8. Well, I hope that makes sense. Now let's move on to adding our buttons. So I'm just going to put that into this container. And now we can move on to style it. If we take a look at our design on Figma, we have our first text as get started and the second as make an appointment. So let's start with this. And I'm just going to make this get started. Let's switch over to the style tab. Its position, make sure this is stretched, and its alignment, make sure this is centered. For its typography, we'll be going with archival. Its font size, let's make this VEM. And I would want to make this 1.125, which equals to 18. I would want to leave the weight set to medium and its line height, make this unitless, or we can actually go with M and make that 1.4. It would still give us 140%. So I can make this unitless and I can make this 1.4. For its text color, I would want to make this white, just as we have on our design reference. And for its color, since we've already added in our primary color, I'm just going to select that, and that will be applied to our button. For its border radius or corner radius, we could make this 0 pixels, just as we have on our design reference. Moving on to its padding, I would want to unlink all values, make this M. And I would want to add in 1M to the top and 1M to the bottom. I'll switch to the hover tab, make this white. And for its color, I would want to make this hashtag 3434. And now when we hover over our button, we can see we have this hover effect applied to our button, but we're not done yet. As you can see, there are no paddings set to the left and right. Now we could actually apply that here, but let's just come over to the advanced tab, switch the width from default to custom, and I would want to make this 250 pixels. And now we can move on to duplicate this. So I can either click on this or select our button and select duplicate. I'm just going to add in our text, which says make an appointment. And now we can move over to style this. So switch over to the style tab, and for its text color, we want to make this hashtag 3434. Now remember, we already added this as our global color, so I'm just going to select that. I'll be changing this to hashtag 888. And that gives us this gray color we have right here. Heading back to Elementor, we can switch over to the hover tab. I'd want to leave the text color to white. Let's change this to our primary color. And when we hover over this, we can see we have that applied just right. Now, taking a look at this, I actually don't like the fact that when we hover over this, we have a little bit of delay. So I can just come over here and make this 0 seconds. And now when I hover over that, that immediately takes effect. Now with that done, let's come back to our container which houses our call to action button. I could actually move on to title this call to action. Taking a look at this, we can see we have no spacing in between these buttons. To do that, we can simply unlink all values here, and I could make this percentage, and for its column, that's the column between these two, I could make this 2%. So that's that for our heading, our text description, and our buttons. The next element we have here will be a 3-column container, which houses our first container, which takes up 50% of this container. The second, that will be about 24%. And the last container right here takes up about 22%. Now heading back to Elementor, I can now choose to add in another container directly underneath this in order to add in our content. So let's drag this directly underneath our container. Sometimes this thing acts up, so you can just add that in. And for its direction, let's make this horizontal. And for the spacing between our elements, let's make this 24 pixels. Now let's move on to adding a little bit of spacing between this container and this. So I can select this, head over to advanced, and let's switch this to M. Unlink all values here and let's make this 3. So 3M, which is still the same as rem when it comes to pixels, 3M equals 48. So 48 plus 24 equals 72. So 72 is also divisible by 8. So the first element we have here will be an image. So heading back to Figma, an image, second an image, and lastly we have a container which houses this image and also houses a container that houses this image and this text. All right, to do this, I would add in our first image into this container. I always like to make this full. So add that in, and I would want to duplicate this. And lastly, just like I mentioned, we have a container at the end of this. Now remember, this container is set to horizontal. So let's see, this is horizontal. So everything we put in here has to go into a horizontal row. Coming back here, I can choose to add in my container right here. So let's copy this and paste that in here. We have 3 images now, but we need to add in another container into this container so we can be able to add in these elements. Heading back, I would just come over to adding a new element, and I'm going to drag another container directly above this image. So we have this container and we have another container and we have our image. And now I can proceed to add in our images. So let's select this, select our first image, come over here, select this, select our second image and add that in. Now a lot of things are actually going to go out of proportion, but just give it a second. So let's select this and click on select. Now let's move on to set our custom width for each of these images. So for our first, let's come over to advanced. For its width, let's make this custom, and for this, I would make this 50%. Still out of proportion, but just give it a second. We would rectify that soon. So select this, come over to advanced, switch its width to custom, and I would want to make this 24%. And lastly, for this container, make sure we're selecting the main container and not the one underneath. So select this, and for its width, instead of actually coming over to advanced, we can just apply its width right here. So I can just drag this to say 22. Okay, so that gives us what we want. And as you can see, everything is beginning to fall into place. Let's drag this over here. And now I can take care of this. So in here, we can see this anchors directly at the bottom and this is at its middle. Now, in order to do this, select this container, make sure we are selecting this and would want to make this column vertical. And for justify content, let's make sure this is space between. For its gaps, let's make this 24 pixels. Let's move on to select this container and would want to make this horizontal row because every element we add in here has to fall into this horizontal row. So let's come back and I would want to select horizontal row. And now we can move on to adding our elements. So for our first element, we have an image. So I'll just drag this into this container. For its resolution, in as much as I always like to leave this at full, we would be going with a medium of 300 by 300 pixels. And I can choose to add in my image. So that would be the first doctor. Now for this image, let's head over to style. And just as we have on our Figma file, we can see we have a border around each image. So in order to achieve that, let's come over to border type. Let's make this solid. And for its pixels, let's make this 3 pixels, all 3 pixels. And for its border color, let's make this our primary color. And for its border radius, I would make this 100%. So that gives us that circle effect. For us to reduce the width of this image, we can come over to advanced, and its width, I can make this custom, and I could make this 18%. And you can see we have our image looking just about the same as we have here. Let's move on to adding our text. So I'm just going to drag this because this thing tends to be really tricky just as it is right now. So let's add that in. Okay, it's gone in. For its HTML tag, I'm going to make this P, and let's add in our text. So let's copy all of this, and I'm just going to paste that in there. So once that is added, I can now move on to duplicate this image. For the second image, let's move on to select our second doctor, select that. And for the third image, select our third doctor. Once we have this in place, I can now move on to make sure this overlaps over this and this overlaps over this. Now to do this, let's come over to advanced, unlink all values here. Make sure this is 10, make sure this is 10, and would want to make this -10. As you can see, now this overlaps over this image. Let's repeat the same here. Come over to advanced, unlink all values, make this 20, make this 20, and for our left, let's make this -20. So that also overlaps over this image. So that's that for our images. Let's come over to our text. Now for this, we can actually choose to add in a break right here. So we can add in a line break by adding in this HTML tag. So we have highly rated by on our first line, which breaks into 250 plus happy client. So make sure this is set to a HTML tag of P, which is paragraph. Let's head over to style. Make sure this is aligned to the left. For its typography, I would want to make this archival. Its font size, make sure this is set to 1 frame. So that's 16 pixels. Its weight, I would want to make this medium. And for its line height, let's make this unitless. So make that unitless of 1.5%. Once we have this sorted out, I can come over to add in my text. I don't know if we've added this in. Okay, so that would be 4Bs. All right, once we have that set, I can now come over to advanced, and I would want to make this precise. Okay, so let's make this 55% of this entire column. So let's come over to width, and I can make this custom and add in 55. So that gives us exactly what we want. Now for our last customization in here, before we wrap things up, I can come over to this container, make sure to select this, not this, have that selected. Let's switch over to the style tab, or rather let's switch over to the advanced tab, just so we position this right in here. So to do this, I can switch to M, unlink all values here, and make sure this is set to 5M. When we drag this to the top, we can still see this right here. And now we can move over to responsiveness. So let's switch over to the tablet portrait mode. All right, for the style tab, we're actually not going to be making as much customization as you might think, but let's start with our parent container. So select this. Let's come over to our layout tab. And for this, instead of going with pixels, we'd rather want to switch over to the percentage, and I would want to make this 90%. We'll leave everything as is right here. Let's come over to the advanced tab. For its padding at the top, we have this set to 5M. We're going to leave that as is, and we can come over to our primary heading. So select this. Since we're already on the style tab, I can just open up its typography, and instead of leaving this at 7, I could switch this to 4rem. So 4rem actually equals to 64 pixels. Hope I'm correct with that. Either way, let's move on. So for its line height, I would want to make this 1.4. So unit less of 1.4, which means we would want this to be 140% of our font size. Okay, for its advanced, this is not looking good, so I can come over to its custom weight, and instead of leaving this at 80%, I could just make this 100. Let's switch over to the next element, which would be our description. I can just come over to its custom weight, make this percent, and I just have to increase this. I could make this 100%, but I think just about 80 or 85 looks good. Or at least to me, it looks good like that. So I'm just going to leave that as is. For the call to action container, instead of leaving this to 2 columns, I could actually unlink all values, make sure this is at percent, and I could make this 4%. Let's come over to our container that houses these 3 columns. So let's select this. For its justify content, I could actually put a space between each element and also make this wrapped. So essentially what this does is instruct Elementor to break our items into multiple lines. And now we can move over to adding our custom weight to each of our elements. Let's start with this. Make this 100% instead of 50, so I can make this 100%. Move on to the next element in here. And since we have this set to advanced, I could just make this say 48. Let's select this main container, not this. So select this. We had this set to 22. We could actually make this 44, but I'm just going to make this 48 as well. Okay, I did not change that to percentage. So let's make that 48. So scrolling up, we can see everything looks good. Now moving over to the mobile responsiveness, we might actually be doing more customizations than we did on the tablet. But nonetheless, let's get into it. First, let's start with our parent container. So select that, head over to layout, and I would want to make this 90%. So in here, make this 90. Now let's switch to the advanced tab in order to reduce the spacing we have in here. So I would unlink all values and make this 4M instead. Now for our secondary container, instead of leaving this set to 24 pixels, I could make this 16 pixels, or we could actually go with 1M. So that would be the spacing between our elements instead of 24. Moving on, let's select our primary heading, head over to style, as I'd want to reduce the font size. So let's select its typography, and for its size, I'd want to make this 2 rem. So that equals to 32 pixels. Now for its line height, I would like to make this 150%. And now I can switch over to the advanced tab and make sure this is set to 100%. Switching over to the text description, I would want to make this 100% instead of 85. And now we can move over to our call to action buttons. So select this, head over to advanced. I could switch from pixels to percentage. And I could reduce this, let's say 90%, that works. And I could do the same for our second call to action button. So switch over to advanced, make this percent, and let's add in 90%. We need to add in a little bit of spacing between these buttons. So I can just come over to margins, unlink all values here, and make this 1M to the top. I think this works. Let me know if you think otherwise. We have this set to 100%. We need to make this 100% as well. So I can just drag this to 100%. Now moving on to this column, we can see we have so much spacing in here. So I can just select this. And instead of having this set to 5, I can unlink all values here and make this 1. That looks so much better. And for this, I can choose to increase our font size, but would want to make sure to add a space, or rather a margin at the top of this, so we have spacing between these images and this text. So selecting this, let's head over to advanced to increase that just a little bit. So I can select this. Obviously we have this set to rem, but instead of having this at just one rem, I can make this 1.25. So 1.25 should be equals to 20 pixels. So head back, and for its line height, we'd want to leave this to 1.5. So that would be 150% of our original font size, which is 20. Let's head over to the advanced tab. I can unlink all values, and let's make this 1. So make that 1. This is looking a little weird. Instead of leaving this as it is, I can just come over to percentage and I can just increase this. Everything looks pretty good. So let me know what you think in the description. Does this work for you? Should I continue this series, or I can just pause right here, because I am not so sure about this, but then I would really like this series to work. So just let me know in the description what you think. Should we keep up with this series? Let me know in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.